1995, working as a summer student. In this role, she worked in a day camp for kids with disabilities in Strathroy. She was asked to return the next year to run the day camp, was able to integrate the kids with disabilities in the summer day camp that was provided through the municipality. When her university education was completed, she was offered a direct support position with the agency, which held the name Strathroy District Association for the Mentally Retarded. Within her first year, she was offered a management position and eventually worked as Director of Support, Assistant to the Executive Director, Director of Human Resources, and in 2010 assumed the position of Executive Director with Middlesex Community Living, which is a position Sherri holds today. Sherri was born and raised in Strathroy and has deep roots in this community. She is married with 2 adult children. Her son, Jonah, was diagnosed with an intellectual disability at 15 months of age. This merged with her professional and personal life into one passion, whereby she is committed to supporting people with developmental disabilities to achieve their fullest potential and to foster the development of an inclusive community. So thank you, Sherri, for joining us.
That's good. Thank you so much for that introduction. I feel like I want to turn the tables because I was so intrigued by your conversation as you got started. I'm one of your Facebook fans. I follow it faithfully, and I'm always intrigued with the SDCI photos. I come from a family of 5, so every time I see a post, I'm like, who's in there? There's got to be somebody I know, whether it's my brother, my sisters, or one of the family friends. I usually find a connection and then send it out through all my networks. I also have to tell you, I was pulling up my Facebook one day and I'm just, scrolling through, and all of a sudden, scared the daylights out of me, I scrolled up and there's my grandmother looking back at me, and I went, that's my grandmother. She died in 1985, I think it was. How am I possibly seeing her on my Facebook? And it was a post through the Horticultural Society, and it was, my grandma had written a story about Melbourne community, and it was a series, I think it was a 3-part series that landed in the local paper, so it was her memoir, and again, I shared that out with my family and friends. Laura Pettit, Laura Pettit. Yeah, so I follow it faithfully. I also want to tell you, who's the gentleman? Oh, I lived on North Street as a kid, so I don't know. Yeah, it'd be probably before my time, but as soon as you said North Street, I said, oh my goodness, I'm in the right place tonight for sure. Well, I do thank you for having me, and I appreciate the introduction. Hearing someone describe my career with Middlesex Community Living makes me feel very old. I also asked myself the question, did they not know where I should land? I just kind of went from position to position to position to position. But in that time, I got to know so many people at the organization. I had sort of my hand in so many different aspects of the organization that I do feel like I know it really, really well, and really proud to be part of the organization for 38 years now. I think I am the longest employee with Middlesex Community Living and have no plans to step away in the near future, so it's really become a career for me. And as she said in the introduction, when I had my first child, my son Jonah, and when we found out that he had an intellectual disability, the world suddenly made sense to me, and I thought, I think I understand why I have the seat that I sit in, because it just kind of merged my worlds together, and I kind of understood why I was placed in the job that I was placed in. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to be coming to you to speak about the history of Middlesex Community Living and the 59 years that we've been in existence. There we go. In talking about the history of the organization, I think it's important to broaden the scope back a little bit and talk about the history of developmental services, because this organization's history got formed in the history of developmental services. And it is important to look at the history of services because it reminds us of a lot of mistakes that we made along the path. And I think people made the right decisions in the moment. They did the best they could with the information that we had. But when we reflect on the decisions that were made for people with disabilities over the years, we can look back with a critical lens and say, we didn't always make the best choices and decisions for people with disabilities. And our history shows that. So Ontario has been providing services to people with developmental disabilities since the late 1800s. Huronia Regional Centre was the first institution in Ontario, and it opened in 1876. At that time, doctors counseled parents to send children to institutions so that they could be sheltered from the stresses of everyday life and from judgment of society. So can you imagine if you had a child with a disability, you went to your doctor for some advice to understand your child, to understand what his needs were or their needs were, and to be told your best bet, the best thing you could do would be to send them to an institution, close the door, and walk away. It would be too hard on the child if you maintained a relationship, and it would be too hard on you as a family. So parents were counseled to step aside, let the institution take over the care of their loved one, and really just walk away. By the 1960s, the government operated 16 of these institutions in rural settings across the province. And they really kind of found their home in the rural communities. So they were often placed outside, just outside of towns or cities. And it was very clear when you drove through that segregation was important by the way in which they structured them. So they were away from everybody else. They gave the appearance that the folks that lived there needed to be separated from general society. The doors needed to be locked. They needed to be placed away from other people. It left community to feel that there was something wrong with these people and that they shouldn't be included in society. It created a fear for folks. And if you look at the pictures up on the screen, and I know there's a lovely way, I'm not going to try to do it, but there's a lovely way to project those. But the pictures up there are quite haunting. So if you look at the gentleman just by the bedside, peering up into the air, I can't even imagine what's going through his mind, but I tend to feel it's something like, please just get me out of here. The other picture to the side of that is a row of beds lined up, and that's how people lived. They didn't have their own rooms. They didn't have individual choice and freedoms. There were beds that were lined up in big rooms, and that's where everybody slept. Similarly, the washrooms were the same way. There were washrooms that just had toilets situated, no stalls, and that's what people used when they needed to use the facilities. And then the other picture on the side is just line up wheelchairs with people just sitting there, and it doesn't look as though they have a very meaningful day or meaningful activities presented to them. Just reflecting on that with the history of Middlesex Community Living. In 1965, Middlesex Community Living as an organization got its roots. It started as a parents' movement. So parents in this community came together. They had children with disabilities, and they were looking to connect with other parents to support each other, to set up that social connection. The parents worked with the Strathroy Lions Club in Strathroy, who sponsored a school for children that were labeled at that time mentally retarded. And I'll use that terminology because it was appropriate in the day, but of course we all know that that language is disrespectful in today's society. At that time, there were 600,000 mentally retarded people in Canada and 180,000 people in Ontario that held that label. By the mid-1960s, many organizations across the province were starting the same way as we were here in Strathroy. So the whole sector that we have today is built on a parents' movement. It's the parents that really created that groundswell to try to coordinate themselves in order to get services for their loved ones. In 1970, the agency was incorporated under the name of the Strathroy and Area Association for the Mentally Retarded, and that was the name of the organization when I started. As seen in this photo, and I know it's really tiny, I've taken these photos right out of that little booklet, so if you're interested, I can share them with you. But these in the photo is the founding members of Middlesex Community Living, or Strathroy and Area Association for the Mentally Retarded, which was the name then. Those founding members included Lauren Gorham, who I believe was a mayor of this community, Catherine Case, who was the parent of a person that we continue to provide services to, John Faber, Cameron McLean, who also had a child with a disability, Evelyn McLeod, and Marion Brady, who also had a child with a disability. In 1970, the basement of the Presbyterian Church in Strathroy housed the school for the trainably retarded. Language is just so awful. Even as it comes in my mouth, it just doesn't sit well. But that was the language of the day. And just talking about education, I want to talk a little bit about the history of education. Just in pulling this forward, I did a little bit of research, and it said the legal requirement for schools to serve all children, to serve children with special needs is fairly recent. Until the 1960s, parents were expected to take responsibility for the provision of education for children with special needs. During the 30 years from 1950 to 1980, students with special learning needs were very inconsistently served in the school system. Many of them were placed in regular schools, but accommodations were usually not provided, and often it meant it wasn't a successful opportunity. Some drifted away from schools, others managed to obtain some measure of formal education, And that was usually a result of having a really good teacher in place and maybe having some good family supports and intervention. For many children that had significant disabilities, the provision of education remained to be a parental responsibility until the 1980s. Although the Hope Commission recommended the expansion of special education programs in 1950, education reforms did not get underway until 1960s and into the 70s. So that's not that far back in our history. In 1962, the government of Ontario repealed most of the human rights laws in Ontario to make way for the Ontario Human Rights Code, the first comprehensive human rights code in Canada. The code affirmed the right to equal access to services, including education. However, it wasn't until 1982 that the code was amended to prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. So again, not that far back in our history did schools accept responsibility to provide education for students with disabilities. As children grew past school age, there was a need for alternatives. And in 1974, the Strathroy Lions Club purchased a hall on Albert Street to renovate as a workshop for adults that were labeled mentally retarded. And that building opened the name Opportunity Workshop. And it's the same building that the Lions, I don't know if you can see it, it's the same building that the Lions Hall has today. It's been renovated a little bit since then. But we've always enjoyed a really nice relationship with the Strathroy Lions. In 1975, Adelaide Central School, just outside of Strathroy, was approved for an expansion which would include a classroom to educate the mentally retarded children. This was the first movement towards an integrated model. In 1977, the organization opened its first group home on Penny Lane, and this was our first residential service that was provided. I think it was 3 or 4 people possibly that lived in that first home. In 1980, it was identified that Opportunity Workshop, the building at the Lions Hall, was too small, and our ministry, the Ministry of Community and Social Services, agreed to fund a percentage of a new building, which would be named ARC Industries. ARC was an acronym that stood for an Adult Rehabilitation Center. Again, some of the language, when I think back in it, like what were we rehabilitating people from? There was nothing wrong with them. They had a disability. They weren't going to be cured through a rehabilitation program, but that was the language in the day. The building officially opened in 1980 with a ribbon cutting by the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Pauline McGibbon. That building operated as a day service for people with disabilities, and quite often in that building, contract work was brought in from the community so that people would have something meaningful to do with their daytime. And I can remember going in there the first time, and there was rows of tables with stools assigned them. And there was contract work that was coming in, some of it from Kentucky Fried Chicken, I know, had a contract there. There was another one with a welding company in Strathroy, and people would sit on stools and things would sort of go down the line, and they would complete little tasks to finish a project. But I also know when work was slow and there wasn't enough to keep people busy through the day, there was a staff at the end that would disassemble the activity and send it back around to the front of the line, just to keep folks doing something that was considered meaningful. In 1988, the organization negotiated its first collective agreement with OPSU, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. We continue to be a unionized environment today, and for the most part, we've enjoyed a really good working relationship with our unionized employees, other than a strike that happened in 2007, which was a really difficult time for the organization. But I don't attribute it to our employees. It was an opportunity for the local office, the head office. They took out 3 organizations to try to help the ministry to understand that there was power in the union. So under our local was Community Living London, was Community Living St. Thomas, and ourselves. So we had 2 big organizations in cities, and then we just kind of happened to be under the same umbrella. So OPSU took out all 3 organizations at the same time, thinking that they were really going to hit the ministry. Of course, they were looking for more funding for themselves, and I can appreciate that they needed more funding. And it took it took those 3 organizations out for about 7 weeks before we were able to end the contract. It was a difficult time in our history, but thank goodness it's part of the history now and not part of the present. The agency had 2 significant housing projects over the years, and these were joint ventures with the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, which is our primary funder, and the Ministry of Housing, who at that time, those two ministries came together and they provided an opportunity for organizations that wanted to expand their living environments for people. And it was a really good opportunity in that Ministry of Housing provided the funds for the actual homes, and then our ministry provided the funding for the staff support. Because one without the other didn't help us out. You know, to just be granted a home didn't help the organization unless we had the dollars for the staff to provide the service within the home. And vice versa, if we had dollars to support people during the day, but we didn't have a place to house them, it didn't really help us out. So we had these 2 housing opportunities in the late 80s and early 90s. So in 1988, the organization really grew when we purchased 4 community homes on Vine Street, Front Street, Westgate, and Drury Lane. And I'm going to show you some pictures of our homes a little bit later. And then we had another housing project in 1992, and that allowed us the opportunity to purchase 2 duplexes, and we created them into 4 separate dwellings. So we have a duplex on Queen Street and a duplex on Stem Street, but we operate them as 4 separate units. But it allows the staff to kind of flow between those 4 units and to maximize the service for folks. Society began to see that people with developmental disabilities didn't need to be secluded in institutions. They really needed to be included and supported in their home communities. In 1987, the Ontario government committed to closing the institutions that they had opened for people with disabilities by 2012. In 2003, the Ontario government committed to closing the last 3 institutions in Ontario by 2009, 3 years ahead of schedule. The government invested $276 million to help move 1,000 people who resided in those institutions into community homes and to strengthen the community services to provide supports to them. Huronia, Rideau, and Southwest Regional Center were the last 3 institutions to close. As a result of these closures, Middlesex Community Living was able to purchase a home and bring 3 people that had spent their entire life in an institution to this community because this was their home community, and to support them into their adult years. Our last expansion was a home that we purchased in 2020 on McAvoy Road, so just outside of Strathroy. It's out in the country. It's a great environment for 3 people that really need to be kind of off the beaten path a little bit, to have some space to roam around and really appreciate sort of that outdoors country atmosphere. Throughout our history, when we look at, we can really see how services have changed and the appearance of services has changed. When people lived in institutions and in facilities, services were provided to people. If you think about it, if you've ever had a hospital stay, you would appreciate when services are provided to you, meaning you don't have a lot of choice about it. You get a service, you get food, you get to go to see specialists in the hospital, you get your medication, you get a bed to sleep in, but you don't really have a choice about when or how you receive those services. It's determined by the hospital, right? That's providing services to people. We have evolved to providing services for people, meaning that people have more control over their lives, investing in getting to know people and then trying to tailor the services that we provide to them. But our history has been that we do that basically from a menu. So we're not giving people full autonomy to choose all aspects of their life and how they want to live their life. We're sort of saying, you know, we have these homes, you can live in this home or that home. You can live with this person or that person. You know, you can participate in this service or that service. So it's better than providing services to people. It's movement towards greater individual selection of services, but we're not quite there yet. Where we want to go is providing services with people. And providing services with people really means that people are at the table and are part of every decision that impacts their lives. I always say to our staff to remember the phrase, nothing about me without me. So every time we're making a decision that impacts a person that we serve, we should be including them in that conversation. They should have a say about the staff that work with them. They should have a say about how they live their life and what happens within their home and where they go within their community. But sometimes the system ends up making decisions for the betterment of the system, for the ease of the system. And we're trying to evolve away from that to give people greater control over how they live their life and the things that are important to them. Just before, I'm going to show you a video, but before I get into that video, I just want to reflect on something in our history, and I didn't put it up there, I probably should have, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Mercantile restaurant, and I want to talk about it because it often comes up for members in our community that knew the Mercantile and kind of wondered what happened to that, why did it close? So Middlesex Community Living purchased the Mercantile restaurant back in 1995, and we eventually closed it in 2016. We closed it because our ministry had made a decision. So again, this is the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. They had announced, they made an announcement that the Ontario government is working with agencies to move away from sheltered workshops towards inclusive employment and other meaningful community programs. With that came a directive that there would be no further admittance into sheltered workshops, which would result in an eventual closure of those environments. The Mercantile restaurant was considered a sheltered workshop, even though it didn't look like a traditional sheltered workshop. And it was a sheltered workshop because the people that worked there were only receiving $2 an hour for the work that they were doing. And I really struggled with that as the leader of the organization because I've been out there several times and I knew a number of people that we supported that were working at the restaurant alongside staff members who were unionized employees of Middlesex Community Living, were making unionized wages, which may not have been great, but probably making over $20 an hour, and the person beside them doing the same job that happened to have a disability was making $2. So it didn't sit well with the leadership of the organization. It didn't sit well with our board of directors. So when this announcement came up from our ministry, we jumped on it and said, now's the time. It gave us sort of permission to say, we're gonna have to do something about it anyways. Let's get ahead of the game and let's close it immediately as opposed to waiting for the government to tell us enough is enough and let them shut it down. So that's really what prompted that decision. And we made a commitment to the people that were working at the Mercantile that we would work with them individually to help them find an option that suited them. These were folks that really had the ability to be employed in the community. And when we started the Mercantile, it was set up to be a training ground, sort of a temporary stop so that people could learn skills in hospitality and then move out into a community job. But what happened is that people got in there and they loved the environment and the customers loved them. So it was a very nice place to be, but it wasn't achieving the purpose of helping people to learn skills and then moving on into community employment. I knew we had to close it when I was meeting with the person that we support that was working at the Mercantile, and she came up to my office and she said, oh Sherri, you're not going to believe it, I got this great job opportunity. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. And she was telling me about a community employer that was going to hire her, and I said, well, what are you waiting for? This sounds great. And she said, yeah, but I don't think I want to leave the Mercantile. And I said, why? You should be doing this. This is fantastic. She said, yeah, but it's safe at the Mercantile. It's comfortable. They accommodate me. If I want a day off, I always get a day off. If I want to change my schedule, I change my schedule. If I don't feel like working, they're very forgiving over there. And I thought, oh dear, we've created a spot that is making people dependent on service as opposed to promoting independence in people. So it was just another example for me of why we needed to make that change. I want to share with you though a video, and this is Brad's story. People might know Brad. Brad Ward has given me permission to share this video. He's allowed me to share it all over the place, so I take it to conferences and lots of great places for people to see. But it's his story in relation to what happened when the Mercantile closed.
When the decision was made, Don and I just thought, oh my God, his life has ended. Big change for him. He felt like lost, just lost, and didn't know what to do with himself.
It's Sherri Kroll, the Executive Director at Middlesex Community Living. Middlesex Community Living opened the Mercantile restaurant about 20 years ago with the intent of operating it as a training environment for people with intellectual disabilities.
I'm Brad.
I'm Lisa. I'm a manager at Middlesex Community Living, and I support that. We met back at the Mercantile where Rob had started. I'm the Ministry of Community and Social Services, who is our funder, made an announcement back in December of 2015 that they were going to move away from sheltered environments towards community employment and community participation. Through long discussion and a lot of debate, it was determined that it was in the best interest of the people that we provide supports to close the restaurant and to support them in community endeavors. So when it was announced that the Mercantile was going to be closed, Bradley took it very hard. So he kind of went from being on top of the world, basically, to you've just taken everything from me and I don't know how I'm going to manage.
He would not sleep at night. Oh, he'd be up in the middle of the night pacing.
Mom and Dad, I kept them up mostly every night because of my anger and my frustration.
But Dawn and I both working and we love our sleep, but we did not get much sleep. It was traumatic.
Yes, it was difficult. And we knew that we were placing a number of clients in a really difficult position, having to transition between what was comfortable, what they knew, and what was brand new.
It was a hard road to take, but at the end of the day, it was the right decision. We needed to move away from the sheltered workshop and get people out to their communities.
When the Mercantile closed, I started a job readiness class.
The job readiness class was basically just for people to discover and learn about their strengths and what they wanted to do.
I learned a lot from the job readiness class. I think I learned how to be a better person. 4 jobs right now. Mondays are Dennings, which is a funeral home in town.
My name is Bill Denning. I am a funeral director here at Dennings. Well, we've always been great supporters of community living and all of the wonderful initiatives that they do. Our relationship is just that much stronger now having Brad as a part of our team. So it's been very much a win-win-win for, I think, everybody who's involved in this.
Tuesdays are the YMCA, so I do all the cleaning stuff, like I sweep the floors, clean downstairs. Wednesdays I do the lawyer's office, which is Rob Stack's lawyer's office.
I'm Robert Dack. I'm a lawyer in Strathroy. I've been practicing law here for like 31 years, and I'm the employer. It's just a joy to be around. He's so happy to have the job. So happy to be here. Entertaining, funny. It's just a joy to have him.
I do the focus, which is the Wonderful Cross focus, which you all get at your doors. I like to bike a lot. I just mostly bike around the neighborhood.
I would really encourage organizations to rethink the way that they're providing services. Some of the old traditional models in service just don't work any longer, and we really need to be more innovative and creative to sustain the service and to really meet people's needs and goals.
I would suggest that anybody who's considering a relationship similar to this, to give it a try. What you're going to find is that the individual that you bring on through team really truly becomes a part of that team, and everybody is better off for having that relationship.
And then when you started to get through it, did you actually help other people?
Yes, I did.
Because some of them took a little bit longer to get to the point you were at.
Yeah.
And they started to struggle and they started to feel that.
So then I go help. Then I had to go help them get better.
Well, today, I don't think he misses the Mercantile at all. He's so busy with everything he does, and he loves the variety of jobs that he is doing.
Without question, I look at the stories that we have from clients and the stories that we hear from all of the staff. It's totally been a great choice because we are now integrating clients more in the community.
I would completely recommend the experience. It's been nothing but positive and happy. It's just been a joyful experience for all of us.
Brad is such a good ambassador of the organization. He often accompanies me when I go to speaking engagements. engagements, and he always steals the show. Brad's a good example too of what community is all about. I'm not sure how familiar people are with Brad or with his story, but a few years back, I'm pretty sure it was during COVID, Brad suffered an attack by someone, a homeless person who happened to be in our community for a period of time. He was on his way to one of his jobs. This person jumped out from the ravine, took a shovel to Brad and hit him across the head. Police services, ambulance arrived. I think a passerby just noticed someone on the side of the road. They called me. They knew that I knew Brad, and I got there to him, and we didn't realize how bad it was, but he had really suffered a traumatic incident. We didn't know the details of it at that time, and Brad wasn't able to tell us the story. But he has recovered really well. He doesn't have any long-term impacts of that incident, other than he lives with the trauma from that, and there's still moments that I think the trauma kind of comes back to him. But the good news of the story is how community rallied around Brad. He had his phone with him, and I asked him if I could open up his phone so that I could get his mom's telephone number to contact her and contact his dad. And then I said to Brad, I'll hold your phone for you while you go into the ambulance so that it's safe so you don't have to worry about it. Brad's phone within 10 minutes was lighting up because the story was going around the town about what had happened to him, and people were calling to check in. Brad, are you okay? Are you okay? I've heard this story. Tell me this isn't true. He was inundated with gifts and people just sending their best regards to him. It was so lovely. And then Brad's really connected in this community and knows the firefighters, police services. His family is part of the farming community. So those services all rallied, and one evening in the summer they did a drive-by his home with all of the emergency vehicles, lights and sirens blaring, and it was so cool because community showed up. Like, it looked like a parade in Toronto, the number of people that were lining the streets down his road to watch this this parade for him, just to let him know that he was a part of this community and people had his back and would ever forever be there. But it's because of him. It's not anything. I'm not trying to tell you a story about community living and telling you that. The story is that people with disabilities need to make connections with community members just like you and I do. They have to have opportunity to make friends and to get to know other people, because it's through those friendships that we develop our social circles, and our social circles are what hold us up in times of trauma and trouble like that. And Brad is just a remarkable person for how he's developed all of these groups of people around him. So, lovely story about Brad. I want to show you though a little bit more about Middlesex Community Living and kind of what we're doing today. So, this is Middlesex Community Living's vision and mission statement. Our vision statement is is value citizens, inclusive communities. So in the vision, we speak to two things: that we believe that we need to support people with disabilities to be valued members of their community, and we also accept responsibility that we have to play a role in ensuring our community is inclusive. So identifying barriers that we might have within our community, working with our community to try to make sure that all aspects of community are welcoming to all citizens. The mission statement supports the vision statement, and it reads that we are committed to supporting citizens with intellectual disabilities to achieve their fullest potential and to foster the development of inclusive communities. So those two things really go hand in hand. The organization is governed by a volunteer board of directors. This is the 2023-24 list of our current board of directors. We have 10 members on our board. I think that list has 9 because we unfortunately had a resignation come in rather recently for someone that just had a little too much on their plate and needed to step away. The board serves a 4-year term, and they can run that term over twice for a completion of 8 years on the board. The board's role is to be ambassadors of the organization. They set the strategic direction of the organization, and they hire and monitor the work of the executive director, so my position. I want to walk you through the supports and services, and I'll try not to be too long on this, and I'll just show you some pictures of sort of who we are and what we do. So this is the main office of Middlesex Community Living. Our main office is at 82 Front Street West in Strathroy. Originally, years ago, back in 1927, actually I don't know what it operated as in 1927, but I know for a lot of people that have lived in this community a long time, they remember it as the old theater. I know my mom and dad dad used to frequent that old theater. And they always giggle when they come in now and walk through the office and go, this doesn't look anything like the theater. Middlesex Community Living entered that space back in 2003, I believe it was. And we've done a lot of renovations to it to make it suit our purposes. Community participation is a service of Middlesex Community Living. It promotes social inclusion, individual choice, independence of rights. It provides activities such as personal development, basic life skill training, social and recreation activities, volunteering, and other activities that lead to people enjoying their community. We offer employment supports for people that are looking for competitive employment, like Brad, and in doing so they may need some assistance from the staff to do resume writing, to prepare for interviews. They may need a job coach with them to help get started at the job, but the goal of employment supports is that the person works to be independent in that role. We have a service location at 18 Front Street. This service is for our employment supports. So if people are going through some training, they would likely utilize this service. We also have an education component as part of that service delivery. Middlesex Community Living also supports people with passport funding. So passport funding is an individualized funding program of our ministry. Anybody that has a disability and has confirmed their disability with Developmental Services Ontario, which is the organization that holds the wait list for services, they can receive an individualized funding pot. For most people, it's $5,500, which isn't a lot of money, but it's something that people can have access to in order to enjoy their community. It's a great program. It's difficult for people to utilize their passport funding because you don't get the money up front. It's a reimbursement program. So you have to purchase your tickets to things, and then you submit an invoice showing that you went to something, and then that money is reimbursed. And it takes a bit of time. Similarly, if you use some of those funds to hire your staff to take you to go do something, to go to the fair, to go to a movie, you have to pay up front for those services, and then you have it reimbursed through that allocation of that $5,500. So a lot of families appreciate it, but aren't able to use it because they don't have the upfront money in order to support their kids to access it. Middlesex Community Living has a number of accommodation services, and we do that primarily through group living. So we have, sorry, just didn't turn my page here. We have a number of group living homes within our community, and I'm going to just kind of walk you through so that you can kind of see them, and I'll try to do this quickly. We have a home on Drury Lane, so this is at 354 Drury Lane. This is a group living situation, so the people that reside there receive 24/7 round-the-clock supports. This was part of the first housing development that we did. Remember I said there was Drury Lane, Front Street, Westgate, and Vine. So here's Front Street. For many years there was a pool at that location. We since have filled that pool in just for liability issues. When we purchased it, it had the pool. This is the home on Vine Ave. And the one on Westgate. So you can see, just looking at the photos, they're just typical homes. We really try to fit in with communities. So some community livings sometimes everybody kind of looks at it differently. I want the homes just to fit in with the norms of the community. I try not to put anything on the homes or in the homes that make it appear like a home that's different than your home and my home. And I always challenge newcomers to Strathroy. I say, you take a ride around and you see if you can pick out one of the group living homes. And they can't do it because there's no markers. Other communities have taken a different position, and they may have a band that says donated by the Orients, which is a lovely way to show your appreciation for the people that made the donation, but it labels the home, because everybody driving by goes, oh, there's something special about that band. Must be people that live inside are special people as well. Or some people put plaques on homes to say, thank you to our board members, such and such. Those are all subtle things, but they do put labels on people as well as labeling buildings. This is another unit that we rent. We've rented it for quite some time over on Park Street. Then these are the duplexes. So 180 and 182 Spence Street. So this is a home that's been divided into 4 separate dwellings for people. And then this is the one on Queen Street. This is the house that we purchased when the 3 ladies were coming out of the institution. up on Hoof and Ankles Crescent, lovely home up there. And this was our last purchase on McAvoy Road. As well as providing group living, we also provide host family accommodations. So in host family, these are people in the community that agree to bring in someone with a disability to live in kind of the family home environment, and they receive some remuneration for that. We provide respite services, so this is an opportunity for the person to get out of their family home and for the loved one to get the person out of the family home so that they can have a break from each other and spend some time doing things outside of the sort of typical family norm. Independent living is for people that don't require 24/7 support but do need some services in their life. So we support a number of people that live in the community in rental situations. Sometimes they're living on their own, sometimes they're living with a roommate. More and more they're living with roommates because to rent any place on your own is becoming really financially difficult to do. But staff would go into those situations as people need them. So we work with people to sort of understand what are their support needs. Do they need assistance to get to doctor's appointments? Do they need assistance with their medication, with their finances? And then staff would go in to provide the service that's requested at the time that they desired. Okay, I do want to talk a little bit. Are we okay on time? We're okay, all right. I do want to talk just a little bit about the struggle that's going on in our sector right now. Because there are some pretty significant things happening in our sector right now. So I'm going to speak to you about some information that came out of the Auditor's General Report. And in that report, it said that in 2016, there were 19,000 people waiting for services in Ontario. 19,000 people that are sitting on a registry trying to get into services that are provided by our government. In 2023, that number grew to 49,000 people. So there are currently over 49,000 people in Ontario that have passed eligibility and have proven that they qualify for developmental services, but there's nothing to provide to them because all the spots within the system are full. There are more people waiting for services than there are services available in Ontario. So even if we vacated all the people that are currently in the system, we still wouldn't eliminate the wait list. So our ministry knows that it's a huge, huge problem, and a lot of families are desperate. They've waited on wait lists for far too long. They're aging out. They're saying we can't do it anymore. Families are breaking down because they don't have the systems and supports in place for folks. And our government recognizes that something needs to be done. And I didn't say this earlier, I guess now's the right time to say it. Adult developmental services are not an entitlement. A lot of people don't know that. They just assume if you need a service, you apply and you get service. Our services aren't like that. There's a limited capacity of services that are available other than passports. So once you're entitled to passports, to that $5,500, but beyond that, to get into a system, to get into something like Middlesex Community Living, there has to be a vacancy. And the only time vacancies are created is when somebody leaves the system. And the only time people leave the system is when they pass away. Because people that are currently in the system know how difficult it is to get that service, and so they don't give it up easily. And I would encourage them not to, right? Lots of families, even though they may want to move, tend to stay where they are if they're getting a service from a community living organization, because it's difficult. Services aren't portable. You can't take your service from Strathroy and move to St. Thomas and think you're going to get it there, because I can't give that service up. If the person is living in a group home with 2 other people, how do I separate a third of the staffing cost to send with one person? Because a third of a staffing cost in a 24/7 arrangement isn't going to be enough for the person. They need 24/7 supports. So you can't just separate it out and give it to people. It's kind of built into the system. So it really, really is difficult for families, and having a child of my own with a disability, I've really come to understand that and have great empathy for families that are struggling. The demographics are also shifting. So we only see now about 1% of what used to be the typical profile of a person with a disability. Typically in service, the agency has supported a lot of people with Down syndrome, people with fetal alcohol, like who have had fetal alcohol syndrome, Some of the syndromes are sort of more the common nature of person that the organization has typically provided supports to, but the profile of people trying to get into the system today is much more diverse. We're seeing a lot of people that have dual diagnosis, so they not only have the diagnosis of an intellectual or developmental disability, they also have a mental health disorder. And that complicates the situation and complicates their profile. We're also seeing people with mental health addictions. We're seeing people that are experiencing homelessness and people that are aging and showing signs of dementia as part of the aging process. So sort of how the system was structured historically and how we provided services to people is changing as the needs of people change and as we're trying to respond to the people that are sitting on the wait list. So that means we also have to change our staffing profile. So what we expect out of our staff today is much different than what we expected out of them a few years back. And evolving into the future, we're going to have to think about how we're going to meet that demand of people that are the hardest to serve. Right now, it's a matching process, which doesn't work very well. So agencies don't hold their own wait lists. There's a central wait list, and that's through this organization called Developmental Services Ontario. So when my son was of age that he was turning adult and we could put his name in for adult developmental services, they came out and they did a lengthy assessment with him. It's called ASSIST and an ADSS. And from that, they get a score. The families don't get the score, but that creates a score. The score tells you where you sit on the wait list. So the higher the score, the more in need you are, the top of the list you go there. If you have fewer support needs, you're lower down on the wait list. Okay, that makes sense. But the reality is when vacancies come up, so there are times when people pass away, it should be that the person most in need gets the system, gets the service, because they're the one that really is the highest in need. But if the person that's highest in need doesn't meet the vacancy that's been created, there can't be a matching process. So sometimes the vacancy in our system, it could be in group living, it could be 24-hour round-the-clock service, but maybe it's 2 elderly women. And the person highest on the wait list is a transitional aged youth with high behavioral challenges, incredibly sexually active, is into drugs and alcohol, and you think you can't match that up. That's not fair to the women that reside there. So that doesn't happen. You go down on the wait list until you find the right match. And often the matches aren't in those group living situations, they're in the SIL support. So it's not 24/7 support, it might be 8 hours a week. If you need 24/7 service, top of the list, 8 hours a week isn't gonna serve you. So you have to bypass and keep going down until you find a match. So the system hasn't changed and evolved to meet the needs of all of the people that are waiting for service. Our ministry knows that, and so they have announced what they're calling ministry reform. And they've sent out a document called Journey to Belonging, Choice and Inclusion, and it's a 10-year strategy to transform the sector over the next several years. It's a visionary document, it's a good read. There's lots in it that I like, but I haven't been able to figure out, in the ministry to date hasn't articulated sort of how they're going to do it. But we do know there's going to be changes. I'm sure some of them will be good and some of them will be difficult for us. Hopefully it results in removing some of the people on the wait list, because that just has to be improved upon. All right, but I don't want to end there. I don't want to end on a bad note. Sorry, that's just a little bit of ministry. I do want to share with you, though, a video, because I think it's a nice way to sort of end the story. We put together a video a few years back, and it's from a staff's perspective, and it says we make a difference in people's lives every day.
Every day we are out in the community, helping people discover their independence and overcome barriers.
Whether it's small or large, we work together to solve problems.
It's up to us to build inclusivity into our daily routines.
The work we do is personally meaningful. It's where we help others find fulfillment in their lives.
Together, we dream bigger and take time to celebrate accomplishments.
And most importantly, we make a difference in people's lives.
Thank you very much for being here tonight and for hearing my story. And I am happy to answer any questions, so if anyone has any questions about anything I spoke about tonight, or any questions generally about people with disabilities or community living.
I don't actually have a question, but I do, sorry, you should know this. I don't actually have a question, but I do have a memory. So I have a childhood core memory. My mom was a DSW at Arc Industries in Wallsburg when I was little. I was about 4 or 5 at the time. It was the mid-80s. And I actually remember going to work with her because maybe she didn't babysitter, I'm not sure. And yeah, they were making puzzles, I believe. And I always wanted to be included because when you're 5, you're like, I want to make the puzzle, I want to do the puzzle. But again, I kind of remember that conveyor of like work that they were doing, and they were all happy, and I always wanted to go, but of course, couldn't go every day. So I didn't go to work, but that was one of my core memories as a child before she became a nurse.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, there were ARC Industries across the province. It was sort of the name that the government used, and people sort of picked up on that. Yeah, and again, it wasn't horrible. I don't want to be critical. It was what we thought to be right at the time, and it was trying to give people something meaningful and purposeful. But it was a congregated, segregated environment, and those same people, once that shut down, were able to find community employment, or to find volunteerism, or to find other things, maybe continue their education, to find other things that was more community-based and individualized, right? Yeah.